Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, December 20th, 2023, and today we are going to be talking about the Ron DeSantis campaign and how it is on the brink of collapsing going into the Iowa caucus and the New Hampshire primary. On your screen right now is the current state of the polls for the 2024 Republican nomination. President Donald Trump hitting his all-time high point at 65% of Republican voters, and Ron DeSantis hitting his ultimate low point at just around 11.1%. Ron DeSantis, who for a long time was seen as someone who could take down Donald Trump in a head-to-head matchup, is no longer revered as such, as following a number of issues with his campaign, fundraising, scandals, dropping polling numbers, Ron DeSantis has fallen very far from being, at one point in time, what was meant to be a very strong candidate against Donald Trump. This is an article from February of this year. Not even 1 year ago, in head-to-head polling data, Ron DeSantis was defeating President Trump. And this was following a 2022 midterm election cycle in which Donald Trump lost the Republican Party a number of competitive seats. Largely due to his endorsements that swayed the GOP primaries, we found that Republicans lost states like Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia that might have been otherwise winnable without Donald Trump-style nominees. Looking at the governor's races as well, Democrats also experienced a very similar result. Democrats were able to win in states they otherwise might not have had Donald Trump not supported certain candidates. For instance, Doug Mastriano in the state of Pennsylvania, had he not been the Republican nominee, Josh Shapiro might have won by less than 15 points or potentially even lost the governorship. In Michigan, Tudor Dixon might have been able to not have been the nominee, and Republicans might have been able to win this race against Gretchen Whitmer, but it ended up being an 11-point margin for the Democratic Party. In Wisconsin, Tony Evers defeated Tim Michels, the Trump-endorsed Republican candidate, by a margin of 3.4%. Again, other possibilities and other avenues that might have been able to be taken by Republicans had Donald Trump not intervened in this primary. In the state of Arizona, Kari Lake, a very prominent Republican right now, narrowly won her primary to Karen Taylor Robson, who was arguably going to do a lot better. Kari Lake ended up losing the governor's race to Katie Hobbs. All around the country, Donald Trump was a poison to the Republican Party. And yet, in a head-to-head matchup, we found that Ron DeSantis would beat Donald Trump just around 10 months ago. And yet, today, Donald Trump is trouncing Ron DeSantis in the national Republican primary polls to a point where Ron DeSantis is nearing single digits. Now, the early signs of the DeSantis campaign collapsing came around the time at which he launched his campaign. Following the 2022 midterm elections was where we saw Ron DeSantis perform the absolute best. Looking at the campaign numbers between the numbers for Ron DeSantis between November and January of, at the time, 22 and January of 2023, we found that Ron DeSantis did very well for this time frame. By the time the election hit, Donald Trump's campaign lead went from 31% in terms of the margin between the two down to just 18%. And as time went on, a lot of Republicans did introspection, started to realize that Donald Trump's endorsements were the reason they lost the midterms, and by around March, Donald Trump's lead had narrowed up to about 14 points nationwide. It was actually not a lot closer when you look at the FiveThirtyEight tracker that shows that Donald Trump at one point in time was just 6 points ahead of where Ron DeSantis was. But when Ron DeSantis announced at the end of May of 2023, Donald Trump's campaign didn't see much fluctuation. The Ron DeSantis campaign was saying just wait until DeSantis announces. When he announces his campaign, he will be unstoppable. His numbers will return and he will rightfully win the nomination from Donald Trump. And while there was a momentary period of time in which the DeSantis campaign went from 19% up to 24%, that was the extent of their lead. In fact, for the entire period that Ron DeSantis had yet to announce his campaign, he was polling significantly higher than where he is today. But you've heard all of this. We've talked about how DeSantis' campaign is effectively collapsing before. What's different about this time? Well, new data from early primary states seem to suggest not only in New Hampshire, but Ron DeSantis is collapsing everywhere. Nationally, in New Hampshire, in Iowa, in South Carolina, and potentially in Nevada, though we don't have any new data from the state, but the general trends are showing a convergence point between Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis. And this was fueled by not only the polls that we have seen, which I will show you in a moment, but a very, very telling and consistent trend. of Ron DeSantis' staff leaving his campaign. Back in July of 2023, just 6 months ago, Ron DeSantis fired half of his staff members because of monetary issues. But it wasn't just that. It wasn't just monetary issues. It was a whole number of things. People wanted to leave. The internal campaign wasn't going as strong as it needed to be. People were leaving this campaign to jump ship to Donald Trump's campaign or other Republicans they thought had a more viable option. And then we saw further announcements that people were leaving the campaign. Just early on this month, on December 1st, a top official left Never Back Down. The Never Back Down Super PAC, which has been Ron DeSantis' day one support group that actually was promoting him prior to his own announcement. And just 3 days ago, the chief strategist for Never Back Down also has left this campaign. There's a reason people are jumping ship before Iowa's caucus even happens. They don't even want to get to the point that DeSantis drops out because it's a stain on their legacy. Ron DeSantis, like I said, was touted as this Titan Slayer. I constantly refer to him as that because that's what he was promised as. That's how he was sold to the mega donors that were funneling tens of millions of dollars into a campaign that has amounted to nearly nothing. And so this really led me to make this video today. We've talked about this collapse, but it really seems imminent. I mean, I can imagine that in the next month, Ron DeSantis departs from the race because it is not a good place to be. This was not his time. And I think many Republicans knew that very early on, but the ego got to him. The poll numbers that suggested he would make the race competitive got to him. And by the time voters actually got to see him and actually got to understand him, well, this is a very standard case, the more that voters learned about him, the less they liked him in the GOP nomination. It also doesn't help that for 4 to 5 continuous months, Ron DeSantis was being attacked on all sides by the left and by the right, specifically President Donald Trump. And in his official capacity as governor, as a soon-to-be-announced candidate who had yet to indicate that he was in fact running for president, he could not refute many of these claims. The things around Disney, the things around extremism, the things around his abortion bill, all of his attacks that were being levied by both the left and the right, specifically Donald Trump, he could not combat because at the time, he was not running as a candidate. So his perception was screwed. His ability to appeal to people in the way that he had been able to prior was completely thrown off by one person in particular who GOP voters know and love, and that is President Trump. But now he has another issue to face as well. We've already talked about how New Hampshire we've seen him not do so well, but let's take a look at some other states. New Hampshire, I just mentioned, you already knew he was at 4th place. But Iowa recently in a brand new poll shows with Nikki Haley from Emerson College with a 2-point advantage over Ron DeSantis. Insider Advantage, a Republican-leaning pollster, also just did a recent poll across the same couple of days. Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley are tied. At one point in time, Nikki Haley was polling in the low single digits, especially nationally where her numbers have seemed to recover quite substantially. When Ron DeSantis announced his campaign at the end of May in 2023, he was outpolling her by roughly 20 points. Today, they're just around 0.2% away from each other. Nikki Haley could very well be the second-place candidate nationwide. Now, this is all ignoring the fact that Donald Trump has secured this nomination. I am moved forward in my understanding that unless he actually is prohibited from being on the ballot as declared by the Colorado Supreme Court, I don't imagine that the National Supreme Court would rule that way, but that is the only circumstance which I could see this race getting between Haley and DeSantis. But what I do think it does say is that DeSantis' campaign has fallen so far off that not only is he not polling in a strong second, he may no longer be second. Because looking at states like Iowa, you see that Ron DeSantis' lead is dwindling. You look at states like New Hampshire, where Ron DeSantis' lead has always dwindled. Right now, Nikki Haley's at roughly 26% in the most recent St. Anselm poll. This is a huge one that is super, super bad for Ron DeSantis. That Nikki Haley is at 30%, according to the St. Anselm poll. Trump is at just 44%. Ron DeSantis is at 6%. 44, 30, and 6. And the one big thing that I think really would get under his skin is not that he's losing to Trump or Haley, but he's losing to Chris Christie. Chris Christie has double the amount of support that Ron DeSantis has. Put that into perspective for a moment. Chris Christie has double the amount of support that Ron DeSantis has. It tells you just how dire of a state his campaign in New Hampshire has been. And just looking at those early primary numbers, I constantly reference this one because it's the same St. Anselm group that found that Ron DeSantis, at one point in time, was within 13 points of Donald Trump. Another time, the University of New Hampshire found that Ron DeSantis was 12 points ahead of Donald Trump. So to see how far the lead has fallen for candidates like DeSantis, and how he lost nearly all of his support to Nikki Haley. His numbers at once 29, 22, 18 have dwindled down to just 6, 11, 9, and 7. Not exactly where you want to be. And don't even get me started on South Carolina. We really didn't cover that much because it isn't necessary. But you can sort of understand why these early states might hit Ron DeSantis like a truck. If he loses Iowa to Haley and Trump, then New Hampshire to Haley, Trump, and Christie, and then South Carolina to Haley and Trump, where does he go from here? He might be polling narrowly in second place nationally, but even his top advisors clearly see that this is not the way to go, that this is not a winning presidential campaign. And we know that, and we know it to be true, and that's exactly why everybody with a brain from the DeSantis campaign is getting out. And I don't say that to ridicule. I just say that to say we can see these numbers. We can see it from the outside. Anyone who's anybody involved tangentially whatsoever can see that the DeSantis campaign at this point in time is not doing a good job and will not make up the margin by the time we reach Iowa. I remember how the DeSantis campaign tried to spin these numbers. Wait till he announces. Okay, he did. Wait till he gets endorsements. Oh, wait, he did. Wait until he starts hitting the trail. Oh, wait, he did. And he's dipping. Wait until the debates. Okay, we did, and he's losing more. Wait until he starts stumping in Iowa fully. The Iowa State Fair, lost support. New Hampshire battleground state, going there, holding rallies, lost support, right? Take a look at his endorsements. Just pulled in Kim Reynolds in Iowa, down in support. These candidates here that aren't Donald Trump, or rather Ron DeSantis, who isn't Donald Trump, is losing support. Another fundamental lesson that I think can be taken away from this that we really don't talk about much here is that you can't outdo the doer. Ron DeSantis has emulated his entire personality on Donald Trump, has completely tried to take that persona, adopt it to himself. You can see it. You can see it in the way you're talking. I wish you could see me right now. I'm talking like Donald Trump does with my hands because that's what Ron DeSantis does. And when you see somebody like that, it comes across as disingenuous and you lose your own identity and your own persona. You cannot out-Trump Donald Trump, and anybody who is anyone on the Republican Party side can tell you that. And Ron DeSantis tried to do that and failed quite substantially. I don't even want to say eloquently because this has been a huge fall from power and from a very, very high point within the GOP. At one point in time, even the betting odds were betting on Ron DeSantis. I mean, look at this. We don't have data that dates back further than this, but for a long time, Ron DeSantis was the favorite to win the nomination. Around the time the convergence point happened, people were still iffy about it, but today, Ron DeSantis, according to the betting markets, has less than a 5% chance of becoming the nominee. I honestly even think if this race ends up being between Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis from some fluke from the Supreme Court, that Ron DeSantis still loses because he's not as likable as Nikki Haley, and he certainly isn't coming across as genuine in the way that he campaigns. Donald Trump, of all people, has been true to what he has stood for since 2016. There's a reason why Democrats want Donald Trump to be the nominee, and it's because he hasn't changed his stances on policies. He genuinely believes he won the last election, so he's not changing anything, and in fact, seems to be getting more right-wing. Ron DeSantis, on the other hand, although he didn't campaign as a moderate, he didn't campaign or govern as one either. He seems to be trying to balance this, I want the soft conservative vote from Mitt Romney and the John McCain era, while also getting the Trump vote, and neither side wants him. That's where you are seeing him getting pushed out. He tries to be Donald Trump, it turns off the traditional Republicans that are voting for Nikki Haley. He tries to be Donald Trump, it turns off the Trump Republicans that would just rather have the guy than have it be somebody who's trying to be the guy. That is his fundamental problem, too, that I think we will see years of analysis dating back to the DeSantis campaign, seeing how far a campaign from a governor from a swing state who had a huge mandate, a huge electoral mandate coming from the 2022 governor elections, winning by 19.4% against the former governor in this state. Somebody who had ran statewide multiple times, a Republican governor turned independent, turned Democrat, served in the House, ran statewide, was polling within 10 points. and obliterated him by 19 in a state that Donald Trump was only able to win by 3. This is a crazy circumstance that somebody with this resume, with this ability, with this energy and enthusiasm and money and expectation has come so far to fall so far. And to think that we haven't even had the Iowa caucus or the New Hampshire primary or the South Carolina primary or Nevada, I don't know which early state it will be, but Ron DeSantis is on his way out. And nearly anyone who has been associated with this campaign that's very high up can tell you that, whether off the record, on the record now that they're gone, or maybe departing the same time he does, and can tell you that after the race is over. We will see what happens as we head into the upcoming primaries and caucuses, because they will tell us the story in actual votes. We don't need any more polls once we actually have the delegate counts in. We won't need any more debates when we actually see who's dropping like flies. And I can guarantee you, I think in a very, very interesting way, that Ron DeSantis will depart from this race very quickly. And not necessarily with grace, begrudgingly, of course, because at one point in time, he was on track to become the next president of the United States. But it will certainly tell us what his future moves are going to be and whether he has a future political career, despite being at one point in time America's favorite governor, at least on the Republican side. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below, subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my 2024 Republican primary analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.